All right, we're here.
Hey.
Pastor Chris Wiggs from Reach Church joins me here in the studio. I'm excited, man, to talk to you.
New John Simmons, the man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, you are the king of the catchphrase, man. Come on, somebody, being my favorite, of course. You know that.
Yep.
What are some other ones, man, that you...
You know what I tell my congregation is that my ministry philosophy is simple: hit them high, hit them low, take an offering, let them go.
That's right. Where did your knack for that kind of communication stem from, bro?
My youth pastor, Charlie Pickett, who's now in Texas, but when I lived in Springfield, Missouri, he was my youth pastor, and he's the king of one-liners. You know, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all be having a Merry Christmas. You know, stuff like that.
So it just rubbed up on you, huh?
It did, man. Yeah. And as a pastor, you know, you got to have a couple one-liners, a couple good one-liners.
Oh, it's always good. In fact, I was just thinking the other day. Well, this wasn't the other day. This was back in June. So over the summer, you guys had WrestleMania.
We did. We had WrestleMania. Yeah, WrestleMania. Yeah, it was a blast, man. It's just kind of a unique, creative idea to get guys to be at church on Father's Day. You know, and so we had like a guy who had an actual championship belt and stuff.
Oh, that's so great. That's so good.
Like,
I loved wrestling growing up.
Yeah,
man. Bret Hitman Hart.
Oh yeah,
my favorite. Legion of Doom.
Yeah, I'm you know, a big fan of Ric Flair.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah.
You know. Yeah, so really, you know, love old wrestling. Haven't really gotten into much newer wrestling. Yeah. But I've got some guys in my church who are big wrestling fans. And it was just fun, dude. Yeah. We just talked about the things men wrestle with.
I saw you on a ladder. Did you get on a ladder?
I got on a ladder.
Ladder match at church.
This
is what church needs more of. We need more ladders.
Yeah, I brought a ladder out, and I had like a cowboy hat on and a shepherd's staff. And
I love it so much.
So what we did was we hid the belt like up in the ceiling, like, you know, like in kind of like a cage match where it's up top, you know.
Yeah.
And then I climbed up the ladder,
like Superfly.
Yeah, and I was just like talking smack. I don't know. And then I grabbed the belt. It was dumb, but it was...
No, not dumb. That is... Look, church needs some humor in its life.
Yeah.
You know, we need to have some fun.
It was a blast, man. And really, you know, it's relatable to the people in our community. Most of our people are not from a churchy background, you know, or if they are, it's been a long time. Yeah. You know, so they like to have fun. Sometimes that gets us in trouble, but most of the time it's a good time. You know,
well, I think for you, like, fun is like the key center of things. So from my world with you, it's like you're always levity is, you know, is around. You know? So.
Yeah. Well, my thing is, I want to enjoy my faith. I want to enjoy my church. You know, I don't want to go to a boring, dead. You know, go check a block. Right. So we try to have fun. I try to keep it fun in the messages. I mean, it's serious too. I mean, our faith is serious, but I want to be relatable to people.
Sure.
And I don't know. There's enough boring stuff going on.
So you got started. The church you're at now is on the Rock Road. By the way, everybody knows this is my favorite street on the earth. I talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm believing for big things on St. Charles Rock Road.
Me too. Yeah.
And you showed up. An old thrift store building, and you guys, I saw this, all of a sudden it was getting painted. It said church on it. I was like, what's going on around here? You know, I got excited. I got curious. And so we end up sneaking by, meeting you, and I love Reach Church, man. So tell me how that whole thing got started.
So we always knew that we were supposed to plant a church in St. Louis.
Who's we?
Me and my wife. So my wife, Laura, and our two girls, we were living in St. Robert, Missouri, when I felt like the call of God to go to St. Louis and plant a church. This has probably been 12 years ago, something like that. But it just, timing wasn't right, you know. It was, sometimes I think God speaks things to us, drops them in our heart, but then they don't come to pass for 10 years. You know what I mean?
I totally get that.
Yeah, and so that was kind of it, and we ended up moving to Owensboro, Kentucky, which was an interesting scenario because I feel like I kind of missed the will of God there because of some grandiose thoughts and plans that I had for my life, right? And so we ended up in Owensboro, Kentucky. It was a growing experience, to say the least. And when we were...
Why do you say that like that?
Well...
We're missing some of the details of it.
No, it just killed me. I mean, we took over. There was a corrupt board there. There was some adultery on the board and some lying and some... just some
great introduction to the church life,
dude. It was it was bad. It was bad. But crazy thing is, though, I just went back there. They've changed the name and they've changed the church completely, and they invited me to come back. And it was like a real healing moment for me, just looking around and seeing how the spiritual climate had just changed there, and that was incredible. But anyway, we were ending our time there, and I said, babe, we're just going to move to St. Louis. I don't know where we're going to live, what we're going to do. We're just going to move to St. Louis. We're going to figure it out. And, this was like 3 weeks from the start of the school year. And Jaylee was going to be going into first grade, And so we said, we're moving. So I get a phone call from a guy. Well, let me back up a little bit. I'm praying and I'm like, Lord, where are we supposed to live in St. Louis? And I closed my eyes and I saw St. Anne come across my eyeballs as I'm praying.
Good old St. Anne.
Yeah.
No one ever called to St. Anne.
Can anything good come out of St. Anne? You know what I mean?
Exactly right.
So I'm like, I know St. Louis because I've been studying it for years. And like St. Anne was a place where I was like, we'll never go to St. Anne. Like, who wants to be in St. Anne? And so...
Which, for those who don't know, is like a very small suburb outside of the county.
Yeah, and it's just not like... Well, I mean, I love it now. I mean,
sure.
it's home to me, but it's just not...
It's not a well-known place.
It's not a well-known place, and it's really not a community that I think you would just be like, I just want to up and move my family from Kentucky to St. Anne. You know what I mean? But I was praying, and I saw St. Anne, so I thought, well, maybe that's just bad cheese pizza. Well, the same day, a buddy of mine called me, and he was like, hey, I heard you're moving to St. Louis. I said, yeah. He said, I got a place out there. I said, where's it at? He said, it's in St. Anne. Yeah.
I love these stories.
And I was like, we'll take it.
Sight unseen.
Sight unseen.
Wow.
So we pack everything up. We move to St. Anne. The kids are back in Kentucky with the grandparents, so we can kind of get everything set up. We get to St. Anne. We walk into this rental house. It is destroyed. It is nasty. There's, dog poop still on the floor, baby diapers. I'm talking disgusting.
What a blessing.
Blessing. My wife breaks into tears, and she's like, she goes out to the car, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? So I get in the car, and she's like, I'm going back to Kentucky to get the girls. I'll be back in 2 days. You need to have us a place to live.
Get out of this place.
Yeah. And I'm like, no pressure, right?
Right.
So I'm like, God, what in the world? So she leaves. My brother comes because he was supposed to help us unload. And he's like, let's just go look at that place one more time. And I'm like, dude, okay. So we go over there. We look at it. We get back in the car. And my brother says to me, Chris, I think this place is redeemable. And when he said redeemable, I felt the Holy Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, like, I'm not trying to be super spiritual, but
It's
I
okay.
just felt the Lord strong, right? And I'm like, whoa. And I felt like the Spirit spoke to me and said, there are some people in this community who feel unredeemable, but I've redeemed them.
Oh, so good.
Right? And I'm hearing the Lord tell me, you're going to move into this place and you're going to paint it up and you're going to, as a testimony of what I'm going to do in this community.
Big time.
Whew. So I call my wife. I'm like, hey, I think we can fix this place up.
I got a word for you.
I didn't tell her that yet.
Okay.
I didn't tell her that yet. I said, I think we can fix this place up. She's like, nope. Call her the next day. I said, babe, I think God wants us to move into this house. She said, I know. He told me that yesterday. Just start moving the stuff in.
Confirmation.
Confirmation.
Get in agreement with your wife on anything.
Yeah.
And especially a big thing like that.
Yeah, and so she was on board. So then we get there, and I'm just like, okay, God, we're living in St. Anne. Where are we supposed to put the church? And the Lord spoke to me. He was like, I literally picked you up, Chris, and I put you in this community. Duh. It's here. And so we found this property. We prayed over it. It sits on the border of St. Anne and Breckenridge Hills. So it's like the first building in Breckenridge Hills, which, if you don't know, that's just St. Louis County is just made up of like 90-something municipalities. And it spoke to our vision of breaking down barrier lines, and so that's a whole nother miracle.
Yeah. To give you a feeling of what area he's talking about, I grew up in this area, went to high school in that area. Rittner High School, born and raised. So all the St. Anne kids and me. I lived in St. John. A lot of saints around there.
A lot of saints. Catholic, very Catholic area.
Yeah,
yep.
And we used to call Breckenridge Hills Crackenridge Hills.
Yep, it's Crackenridge Hills. Yeah.
And so that's the type of place that you're moving into.
Yeah.
To redeem. For God to be able to use you in your church to redeem some of the folks in that area, which I think is a beautiful image of what God does in all of our lives, if we let Him. And I certainly, because I've been believing for a long time for the Rock Road for something to happen, and for someone to come in with a story like that is really encouraging to me, because it just shows that God, has a plan. And like you said earlier, it may not happen in the time frame or the the desire that you have in your heart,
That's right.
at the start. But so when you get walking in faith, which is what you were doing, you were like, I'm going to St. Anne. I see it in my eyes. I'm walking by faith. Like, I don't know where to go. I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know where to put the church. I don't know any of the questions.
It was, dude. It was just like blind. But I like to border. I think that faith is sort of like borderline on stupidity. You know what I mean? Like, so on the line of faith and stupidity, that's kind of where I like to live.
Oh, that's well. Hey, if you look at the Bible and you would look at the choices that some of these folks were making, and you didn't tell them God had told them,
right?
You'd look at all of them and be like, "What are they?
You are dumb." Yeah.
So you live there, so I don't want to gloss over this because I think it's important. That you don't just come to St. John or St. Anne rather in find a church and just plop some money down. Like, you didn't even have money for the house yet. Like, things were not. No. And so tell us how this goes.
Didn't have job. Yeah. I mean, didn't have anything. So we had made a deal with the church we were at. Like, hey, can you guys give us some kind of I mean, we weren't fired, but I was like, give us a severance. You know what I mean? Wow. Like, help us for a few months, because I had a mental breakdown out there.
Really?
Literally.
What had happened?
I just reached this point of, to be honest with you, dude, as even a Christian pastor, the spiritual attack, the depression, there was a time I wanted to kill myself. I mean, literally, it was it was so bad. Like, at one point that I gave my pistol to my wife and I told her to hide it.
Whoa.
Yeah, like, and my grandfather had just committed suicide. He had shot himself. This was in 2017 or 2016 that he killed himself. And I had just reached, like, I just had a mental breakdown. And it got to the point at the church where we were at in Kentucky where I was just like, I just can't. So really, coming to St. Louis, we were like, we don't even know. It might be a little while before we plant a church, just because I needed to breathe. So, like, we showed up and I got a job at Menards.
Yeah.
Save big money at Menards.
Yeah. Oh man. So you're just working the regular. But let's back up, because I don't want to just speed past this.
Yeah.
What do you think was at the cause of all that depression and stuff you were facing and dealing with?
Certainly spiritual attack.
Yeah.
There was
just being a pastoral role, or
but it was more than just that. Like, being a pastor is one thing. It was just the stronghold on that church and in that community, the religious spirit that just was really tough, and it was tough on our whole family. So. Yeah.
You felt suicide was an answer to that?
Well, no, I knew suicide wasn't the answer.
Yeah.
But I was contemplating it. I mean, I never attempted it.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where things were so bad at the church, and it even flowing into my marriage and everything in my life, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That I'm like, I don't think I want to keep living, And even as a follower of Christ, right? I was just in a dark place.
Yeah. So how did you start to climb out of there?
We left.
Just leaving was enough?
Dude, honestly, we left, and it was just the brightest thing. Honestly, just saying that we were getting out of there, because it was one of those scenarios where we missed the Lord.
Yeah.
Bottom line. But the thing about God's will is you can miss him, but then when you get where you're headed, then, they say there's God's perfect will, and then there's his permissible will.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So God's perfect will was probably something else for us, but when we got there, it became God's will. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And but our time was just done there, And crazy thing, dude, my brother, before we left for Kentucky, he said, Chris, I feel like I have a word for you. I'm like, okay, great. He's like, the Lord says you're going to die out there. And I said, what?
Excuse me?
Yeah. I said, what does that mean? He's like, I don't know. And I said, thanks. Like,
not the word I want. Take that word back, bro.
I'm like, thank you. And I thought, well, maybe, I'm going to go out there and live a long life and die a happy old man. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And when I got there, I realized that the Lord there were some things in my life that the Lord needed to take out of me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not related to God didn't bring me to a point of wanting to take my own life. That's not God,
of course
obviously.
Not, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, the other pieces of, I had this desire to build a mega church and to, in the back of your mind, you think you're going to be somebody, you're going to become something or whatever. And God's just like, dude, it's not about that,
Yeah.
And so, a humbling experience, also a tragic experience, but the freedom, I mean, I just remember pulling into town and seeing the arch and just being like, we made it. We're here. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And most people aren't just like, can't wait to get to St. Louis. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's there was the Meet Me in St. Louis. That was 150 years ago.
I know, exactly.
No one's been singing that song recently.
Exactly. And so, but man, I saw the arch and I was just like, dude, we're here.
Yeah,
we're home.
That's an interesting story because what I love about it is your honesty. Is like, look, like life wasn't easy.
No.
And, for people who get into ministry, whether it's pastoral or under any capacity, and you think God's called you to do something. Like I remember for me, like starting a ministry Testimony House, like I had big plans for what I thought God was about to do with me. Like if you would have asked me like 5 months after starting Testimony House, I was going to be the next Billy Graham, and I was going to do all this stuff. And, you know, but really, it's like I had a lot of refining to go through, a lot, a lot of sharp edges to get molded out, a lot of humility and pride and get knocked off of my life because I came out of the world, and I was like, well, God calls you, you must be about to be the next big thing, You're
going to be somebody, yeah. And the thing is, like, obedience is what makes you somebody in His kingdom. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like it's and if God sees fit to give you a huge platform, great. And if not, I mean, like I feel like, and I pray that I'm over that. You know what I mean? Like, there's always that temptation.
Yeah.
It's the same temptation that the enemy tried to even throw at Jesus. Hey, I'll give you all this. If you just, and so, but it's better to just be humble and just to be in His will.
Yeah, I think the best way to do that is obedience, and that was a hard lesson for me to learn, and I'm still walking in correction in that area, because it's like this came to my realization recently. I was having a conversation because I work at the local church now. I actually work at a church in St. Anne as well.
Awesome. Yeah.
So we're all St. Anne related here,
man.
So it's the first time as a Christian where I've been in some sort of like I have authority above me. So if I was doing the ministry, it's like I am the top. No one really is besides God. No one is coaching me on how to do things differently or how to act or in these sorts of things. And so when you get in a situation where you're surrounded by leaders, strong, mature leaders, and and they bring some things to your attention, and you're like, ugh, I don't want to do that. Oh, why do they want me to do that? Like, I don't think that's a good idea. I would do it differently. And like, you start walking into all these different lanes that I had never walked into before. And somebody was like, well, John, have you ever dealt with authority? And I had to think about it. I was like, no. Like, before I was born again, I was doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. My dad died when I was little. Like, for 25 years before I got born again as an adult, or
you're living your life.
I was just living. I had no one to say, Johnny, don't do that. Johnny, you're doing things wrong. Fix the way you're behaving, And so when I got in a situation, especially at the church, where people were like challenging me, like, why do you, if I ask you to do something, why do you come at it like, like I don't think I should, And that was a real eye-opening moment, because I was like, obedience and hear and obey, listen and obey. God teaches us, if God tells me to do something, I get convicted of it. It's easy to sort of put down the cigarettes or put down the language or put down the gambling or whatever it was in my past life. But when it came to just serving someone above me just because God put them in that role, was very difficult for me at first. And I think that allowed me to sort of get some of those hard edges off.
Yeah, and I'm kind of going through the same thing, because I'm part of a church planting network now.
Yeah.
And so I am the church planting director for the southern Missouri portion of the Assemblies of God, okay? But within that, I have authority over me.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're a church planter, it's sort of like, dude, you're building this church or whatever. You can
This is what I want it to look like.
What I want it to look like. Mm-hmm. And so I've noticed these random, like, middle school insecurity feelings, like, that I didn't even realize I had, because I'm so used to, like, not in a jerky way, but I'm just used to kind of being in charge of what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. But when you're not completely in charge, there's this humility piece where you're like, dude, maybe I don't agree with this.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
oh, I totally get it.
But it's not up to me.
Yeah.
It's not up to me.
Yeah.
I'm not, like, head honcho at this thing.
Yeah.
And so it's been humble pie, man. It's been like and that's the thing, like, we always should be allowing the Lord to just, like, poke us. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, here's the next growth thing, right? Because if we stop growing, what good are we? So I'm like, dude, I'm still growing.
Yeah.
I'm still learning. And I'm just praying all the time, like, Lord, please help me to be more like you, like, in my marriage, the way that I speak, the way that I raise my kids, the way that I minister. Like, I've got to figure out how to be more like Jesus.
Yeah. It took me a minute, because there was a season, especially for me, it's like you get born again, you're that baby Christian, there is fire all over all the baby Christians. Like, they are ready to knock the walls down and take everybody with them down to,
you feel strong. Yeah.
Yeah. And you spend a few years of that. Like I've been, so this past September, I've been a Christian 10 years.
Woohoo!
And I can't even been in 10 years. I feel like 10 minutes sometimes, but
yeah.
5 or 6 years into that, and you just been going to church for a while, and you haven't seen a miracle in a while, and you don't pray as much as you used to.
That's right.
That Bible's got a little bit of dust on it, and it's like, I go to church, I know how to say the prayers, I could pray still. Like if you asked me to pray, you wouldn't think that I was like, relaxed in my my relationship with God, but it became that way, for big seasons of my life. In the middle of me walking out what I thought was God's plan for my life, I just got sort of like, well, things aren't moving, it's not going where I want it to go, things aren't looking like they're supposed to be, and it's really because I hadn't got my heart in a position to like really focus on serving others instead of like focusing on pushing myself out there and making the ministry what I thought it should be or what I thought God wanted it to be and these sorts of things. And so that really helped me get in a space and having people around me who would like really, again, to use the word challenge, like my way of looking at things. And then so it renewed in me a strong conviction to like, that relationship with God is not just because you've been here a while and you know some things and you heard some verses, and you can repeat them back to somebody. It's not mean it's time to just put the Bible down. Yeah. It's not, your prayers still have authority, and it's just you forget that because like when I was born again, I was like, every prayer I'm sending up is getting answered.
God's hearing me. I'm out here performing miracles in His name. Yeah,
and a couple of prayers like that don't get answered, and you start to get just cynical almost.
Autopilot faith. You're just like. And one of the things I've been talking about at church lately is like there's a difference between a saving faith and a sanctifying faith, right? Like if you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you'll be saved, right? That's the fire insurance piece, right? Like that's the, hey, get out of hell free card, right?
Amen. Amen for that one.
But there is a difference between that and like, I want Him to be my Savior, but I need Him to be my Lord, right? Mm-hmm. Because if He's Lord, then that means I have to start living my life the way that He wants me to live my life, right? And I think there's a lot of Christians who they may be saved, maybe they're going to go to heaven, but that doesn't mean that they're going to impact this world the way that they're supposed to. And then when we get there, is the Lord going to be like, dude, maybe He'll even say, you buried your talent. Like, I don't even get out of here. You didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference between Him being Savior and Lord. That sanctifying work is that process in which we become more like Jesus, and we have to submit ourselves to that work continuously.
Yeah, submission, authority, obedience, hear and obey. Like those are hard lessons.
I don't want to hear this.
Those are hard lessons if you're not ready to, or if you feel like you know enough. Like and that's how I often felt that I was not the smartest guy in the room, but like I studied the Word. I got delivered. I'm living a life where I'm not running in, secret sin and all this stuff. And so I thought, well, I've got this figured out, and
that's right.
That's not how we're supposed to act. That's not how God wants us to act. And so getting some of my pride knocked off and being able to serve people and pray for people differently, it was a real lesson in not just obedience, but kingdom work. Yep. Like God's called us to serve, be upside down pyramid everybody uses, and it's like, I had to flip the wrong way for a few minutes, you know?
Absolutely.
And I'm trying to be real here because I know that people, just because you're called to ministry doesn't mean you've got everything figured out and you're able to perfectly get everybody. And, we see a lot of pastors fall who get in public, spaces. And it's like, I'd much rather not be in that public space and have to deal with that and get right. Right. Just be right.
That's right.
It doesn't matter where I'm going. I just want to be right.
Yeah. Well, to your point, like this is a totally different topic, but this celebrity pastor culture that we have, and I want to be careful because I don't want to just be like critical.
Yeah.
But we've kind of created a celebrity pastor culture where it's like we pump these guys up like they're some kind of rock stars, right? Yep. And it sort of gets skewed because you're all of a sudden you're viral and you're all over the place and then you've got security and I get all that. I mean, I get some of that. But the point is like Jesus was like, I'm humble. I'm, take my yoke. It's easy. My burden, it's light. Like I'm a carpenter. None of this, hey, here's my rider, the things that I want in my green room. You know what I mean? And so that's where I have to keep my heart in check, because when we start viewing ourselves as people who deserve, this incredible attention, right? Obviously the Lord blesses people, But when we think we deserve things, that's when we sort of get in trouble.
Yeah, I remember born again, going to a big church in the area, thousands of people coming to service, and me looking at the pastor who was teaching a good word, and I was getting a lot out of it, and putting him in some sort of, not pedestal, but like I admired him, and I was like, oh, I don't want to be a pastor, but like he really has life figured out, And there was a couple other examples that came later in my Christian walk where I came in circles of those types of people. But then as I started to work in the church and work in ministry, and I got around some of those people, like even some of the same people I'm talking about, and spend time with them and go to lunch with them and see that,
maybe not.
Don't meet your heroes sometimes.
That's right.
And even in the church world, it's like, see a pastor who's given this great word on the sermon, and then also will ask you to like sow a certain seed so you can have breakfast with them on Sunday.
That's
and it's
right.
like, and like that kind of stuff like irks me sometimes. And it's like not just the money part, but even like they aren't at the prayer meetings, or they aren't at the the outreach thing that the church is doing on Saturday where we're handing money to the, like you guys did a thing where you guys were during COVID had the truck outside the church, and you guys were unloading boxes of food into the the neighborhood cars who needed it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are pastors in this area whose church would do that activity, but they wouldn't think to sit there and help with the box packing.
I think it's because we lose our focus. I think most of these guys, including myself, we start off with the right heart, the right intentions, but if we don't keep ourselves on the altar, then we can wake up one day and go, oops, what happened? Who am I? You know what I mean? And we forget that it's about people. And people say ministry would be great if it weren't for the people.
Right. I'd be a perfect Christian if I never left my house.
Yeah. And so we forget that it's about people. And so it's just like this constant, you got to remember, like, okay, what did Jesus do? He was in the thick of it, man. We've got to keep the focus right.
Yeah, your motto at the church is stripper next to the businessman, right?
Yeah, so we see a church where the stay-at-home mom sits next to the stripper, and the homeless man sits next to the millionaire.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And I was always praying, Lord,
another catchphrase.
We need a millionaire.
Yeah, we need one to get that. Yeah, lock it up.
We got a bunch of other people. Like that stuff's not a problem.
The redeemed.
Yeah, we need the redeemed. And so the Lord, thankfully, has been sending people who, because it's never hard for us to find like the down and outers.
Yeah, that's what Jesus came to find.
Yeah, I mean, those people are just like, they're there.
They're everywhere,
Jesus is like, the poor you'll always have with you, he said. You know, and it's true. And so that's not the problem. It was finding people who are willing to associate themselves with those people, because the vision is not to just be a homeless outreach or a rich people church. It's for those two guys to sit together, right? And so now we're starting to see the Lord answer prayers of like, wow, now we have like these wealthy business people who are coming to church with this guy who is an alcoholic that lives on the streets. Okay, that's what we wanted to see. And then we want to see this rich guy, if he needs to humble himself, he's humbling himself. And this guy, if he's got a drug problem, alcohol, he's getting freedom, like working together.
Yeah, it's an interesting take because, it just geographically and, politically or whatever idiocly you want to get into, racially, churches are often divided, and whatever faction that looks like, and so a millionaire is often in a more affluent church, and affluent not because they're better Christians, but affluent because they've got money, they poured it in, and they they live in a neighborhood where the poor aren't often
right, they're not in their neighborhood. Exactly.
And so for you to have this plan and also pray and believe that it can be answered, because it's unusual, I would say. I mean, to see a church filled with people that are that opposite.
Yeah. Our church is like super diverse. And I think to the point, like my mother-in-law was there just a few weeks ago and she's just like, I just don't get it. Like, like we have this couple in our church. They're incredible. And they intentionally live in one of the roughest neighborhoods in St. Louis on purpose. Like they don't have to live there. They live in Baden. Okay. Up north.
Yeah.
And they moved into Baden 25 years ago on purpose to live life on mission in that community. And it's like, why would somebody do that? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's because, hey, the call of Jesus, where maybe I'm not like you and you're not like me, but we have this one thing, and that's Christ. So our church is diverse racially, socioeconomically, age-wise, it's just, dude, it's like, what is happening in here?
Reach Church. So, what has been like? So you launch a church, and then like 5 seconds later, COVID happens.
Dude, it was horrible. Yeah, we launched in March 2019. COVID hits
a year later,
March 2020, and I remember they're like, "Hey, got to shut down for 2 weeks," right? And I'm thinking, well, we might as well just close the church because we're a baby. Yeah. We're a little baby church, and I'm thinking we can't survive not being here 2 weeks. People will never come back. 2 weeks into 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5. I mean, however long it was. I think it was like 9 weeks where we weren't even together. And then when we got back together, nobody was there. People were still at home. So like, we thought we weren't going to make it. But the cool thing was, we started getting a lot of outside financial support during that time because I think people were like, dude, if we don't give to Reach, they're not going to make it. You know what I mean? Just because we were so new. So financially, we made it. It was just some of the hardest times ever not being together with your people. But now I'm looking around and I'm like, dude, we made it out of this thing. Yeah. And I'm thanking God because I'm like, finally, the amount of people who are back at church is more than who we had before. And, we're growing again. And like, we're seeing these good things. And even though COVID was like just a nightmare in so many ways.
Yeah. There's no roadmap for anybody. And so like, I looked at my pastor and I looked at other churches that I was following and watching sermons from and seeing how everybody reacted so differently.
We didn't know what to do.
Right.
Yeah. Who's been in the middle of a pandemic?
Me neither. And it was one of the things that I was most confused about. I've shared this with a lot of people, but maybe not on the podcast, is that like, when it came to like opening your doors or not opening your doors or vaccines and not vaccines or whatever it is, it confused me so much because I have my own personal opinions, but I was like, why isn't the church in agreement on any of this?
Right.
If we're all hearing from God, why haven't we come and, and it confused me to the point where I was like, well, you know what? I'm just not going to do anything because I don't know what's right. There's a lot of voices.
And like, so for me, I'm a little different in this. I feel like the church, now this is not popular, what I'm about to say. I think we need to stay out of a lot of the political stuff, and we need to focus on the kingdom stuff. Yeah. So like when it came to masks, no masks, vaccines, no vaccines, like, dude, we're here to focus on Jesus, right? If you're a mask person, awesome. If you're, a non-mask person, great. If you're a vaccine person, great. If you're not, fine, great. Whatever. You know what I mean? Like and same with politics. We get caught up on this and that. I tell people, dude, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm a monarchist, and I have a king, and his name is Jesus, right? Yeah. And all this stuff's going to fade away, right?
As we've seen.
Yeah, and there's a new kingdom being established where Christ is king, right? So we lose focus, and I think the early church had more of that focus of like, yeah, we're all different. We're Jews, we're Gentiles, or whatever. Well, even Paul, though, he's having to write to them and say, hey, we need to remember, here's our focus. And so we get our eyes in the wrong place, I think.
Yeah, for me, the confusion just led to, like, watching what other people were doing, and I was just like, all right, what's going to happen? And so I would look at churches, specifically on the Rock, because I'm believing for good things, and I would see everything shut down. I was like, God, how's this going to move?
It's horrible.
And yet, here we are 2 years later, 3 years later, however long. And I see you post pictures of like your Thanksgiving meal you had with your church. Yeah. And it's like, oh, the church is full again. Like we're
back.
And I'm so glad that you were able to navigate that. Yeah. Not just you, but anybody who struggled. I can't imagine what it was like. I'm so thankful that there were some people who sewed into the churches to keep it going through the rocky times because it had to have been difficult.
And some churches, didn't make it. Yeah. Some churches didn't make it through. And so it's like, I'm just grateful, and it just feels good again. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like we're worried about this or that, or we're just like, okay, we're back.
Yeah. So how do you, as you grow, so because you said you're bigger now today than you were pre-COVID. Right. So what's it like for you leading a growing team and trying to build out, like, do we get staff? Do we get people? Like, what do we need? How many volunteers? We only got like 3 people helping with the kids. Like
we're like in the thick of that right now.
Yeah.
And we're at this point where we're like, okay, we need to make some hires. We need to do some things. So it's sort of like, I feel like I'm flying by the seat of my pants right now, particularly because I have so many other responsibilities with the church planning network and then at the church. And so I feel like once I have a plan, then it's like, oops, that didn't work. You know what I mean? And then we come back to the drawing. I feel like we're at the drawing board every week, which is kind of fun, but it's also like, oh crud, what are we going to do? You know? So then, as a growing church, you're like, well, you only have so much money. So it's like, well, maybe we could pay this person full-time, but the full-time salary will be like a crummy starting teacher's wage or something. You know what I mean? And finding people who are willing to come to a church that's like ours, people, it's just different. Yeah. Hey, we're going to pay you crumbs and we want you to come and, So yeah, we're in the midst of all of that right now.
You need some people who get St. Anne in their eyeballs and are, hear from God that way.
We do, because it's not like, some churches and church planning, it's like, it feels, for lack of a better term, it feels more sexy. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, look at this. We're in this big area. We're doing this in suburbia and whatever. And then it's like, we're on the rock road, so you have to have people who are called, to that area, but the Lord's faithful, man. He just keeps sending the right people. So I feel like sometimes, this is what one of my guys said the other day. He's like, do you ever feel like this is all just happening in spite of us? I'm like, yes, I do.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah,
because you can't force these things, and as I've learned, the harder you force it, the less likely it is to do anything.
Yes,
and so when you have people who show up at the church, these are local people, right? These are Breckenridge Hills people,
absolutely,
as well as some of these other.
Absolutely.
These other
I mean, we have some people who travel, 20 minutes or whatever to get there. But the majority of our congregation, they live in St. Anne, Breckenridge Hills, St. John, Overland, Woodson Terrace.
Which I'm always I'm like a church plant. Like, I think, who's going to go to that church if they already have a church?
Right.
Like, I those are the questions that my natural mind has.
Yeah.
But it's like you were getting people who weren't going to church, or like,
yeah. And I think, dude, in our community, you'd be surprised. At least right there around where we're at, most of those people don't go to church anywhere. I mean, they just don't. Yeah. And a lot of the churches that are in our area, which I don't feel like there's a ton. But right in our general area, they're more established and they've been there a long time. And I think, you know what happens is people live in that community and then they kind of migrate out. Well, I think some of them come back to go to church. You know what I mean? So it's still not like the local community people are being reached. Yeah. I mean, of course, there's other great churches doing great things. But I think that's part of the thing is, just because there's a couple churches doesn't mean people are going to them.
Yeah, and so you had to feel, and I'm sure you have some stories to tell, like, of people in the neighborhood who've been impacted, not just by going to your church, but like you just having milk on Wednesdays to give to people and things like that.
Yep, absolutely. Well, one thing that comes to mind is a guy named Scott in our church.
Yeah.
Okay, so I met Scott before we launched, and I was at the park with my kids, and Scott was at the park with his kids, and he was drinking a tall boy. I mean, it was like the middle of the day, right? And his kids are playing on the playground.
Wednesday day drinking.
Yeah, and he's just like putting down like one of these huge things. I'm thinking, dude, you got to drive your kids home,
Yeah.
And so anyway, I sit down, we're chatting or whatever, and he's talking, and I'm telling him what I'm doing. Hey, I'm planting a church, He's like, oh yeah. He's like, I haven't been to church in 20 years, I'm like, yeah, well, you should come, right? We're gonna launch in September. Well, we didn't launch till March. Well, anyway, I didn't think about it again. The day we launched, here comes Scott to church. Alcohol on his breath with his kiddos, I'm like, hey, you came. He's like, yeah, took you long enough. Right?
He rebuked you. I love it. I love it so much.
So he shows up or whatever. Well, here's the thing. He attended our church as a drunk for the first year and a half. And I'm telling him, Scott, he accepted the Lord, he got baptized, and I'm telling him, dude, you got to quit drinking. It's going to kill you. He keeps drinking. Gets to the point where he looks like he's going to die. Speaking of milk, he used to help hand out milk during the outreaches, and one time I had to tell him, dude, you have to stop because you're just too drunk to be able to focus on doing this.
Yeah, it's real talk.
He started walking with a cane. His liver was shutting down. He looked like he was going to die. Young guy, in his 40s, And finally, one day calls me, Chris, I got to get help. I said, okay. He said, what do I do? I said, meet me at DePaul. We got him to DePaul. We got him detoxed. We just gave him a coin Sunday for 18 months.
So
clean and sober.
Wow.
His body's healed. He can walk again. You know what I'm saying?
That's so good.
So, and he's serving Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, man, the whole thing's worth it for Scott.
Yeah.
Because not only is now his life changed, think about his boys.
Yeah.
Their life's going to be changed.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's that process, right? For some people, it's like, man, I got born again and all my desires went away and that happens. And that's awesome when it happens. But then sometimes for guys like Scott, it's like, it's this process.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a process for everybody. Like just because Scott got saved and he's dealing with something like that, I just think about all of us. Like,
yep.
I was still dealing with pride 8 years in. Like,
absolutely,
know, like, there's stuff that doesn't just fall away just because you learn how to do the thing that's gonna kill you if you don't stop it.
That's right. And it's just some things are more obvious than other things. You know what I mean? Like, my sin may not be as out in the open. You know what I mean? Like, but when I'm being a jerk to my wife, that's wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or whatever it is. So, it's just a continual process.
Yeah. Speaking of your wife, Laura.
Yeah.
Bro, let's talk about marriage and so you guys got the house cleaned up and she was like, all right, this is livable.
Got the house cleaned up. You know, they come back and so then I got my job at Menards. Laura got a job at a dental clinic, and we just sort of started taking off from there. Laura and I, we've been married for 15 years. Wow. Is that right? 15 years. In February will be 15 years. Yeah. And so
big time, man. Congratulations.
Big time, dude. 15 years feels like a long time. Some people are listening and they're like, dude, we've been married 50 years.
I haven't, I'm not that old. I can't do it yet.
I'm like, I'm feeling like 15 years. I'm like, dude, yeah, look at us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Look what we've accomplished. Because, you go through seasons, and sometimes they say like the first 7 years of marriage, you're just like, what are we doing? Are we going to figure this thing out? And I feel like, thankfully, after 15 years of marriage, like things have just gotten better and better and better, right? Because it's a struggle, especially for Laura and I, because we're both like really like tough personalities, you know. But she's been right by my side this whole time. She's been with me, leading worship for me for the last 15 years, up until just recently, where she's like, "Hey, I'm done." You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to lead worship right now.
That's the hats that church planners wear. We do everything.
Everything. That's exactly right. And so, she's done it all. Along with our two beautiful girls, which we adopted our girls in 2015. So we couldn't have kids. Like, we tried to have kids, and it was really heartbreaking.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
It's one of these things, because you're just like, well, what's the deal? Like, is it me? Is it you? Like, what's the problem? Which causes fights and all these other things. And so Laura's like, I think we should look into adoption. And I remember, this is going to sound horrible, I remember thinking, no, I don't think I'll be able to love some other kid that's not my biological child.
That's real talk. Okay, yeah.
That's real talk. Yeah. And I was just like, I just don't think I can do that. So she drugged me to like the foster care classes and the adoption classes and all of this. And anyway, I'll preface it. Let me say this. First of all, when we got the girls, I said to Laura, I don't know how I could love natural-born children any more than I love these kids, right? These are my kids.
Yeah.
And what I told the girls when they were little, and I still tell them, is, I've always been your dad. This has always been your mom. From the beginning of time, God knew that this is what it was going to be. Like, so don't ever tell me these are not my kids, Don't ever tell me, well, they're not your real kids. Dude, I will knock you out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and we submitted our packet. You have to submit a packet.
Okay.
We saw the girls. We were like, dude.
Where'd you see them? Like, how
so
old were
there's
they?
a website, for the state of Missouri for the adoption. And then you
just like through foster care?
Through foster care, yep. And so you have to submit a packet, which is just all of your information. And Jaylee and Lydia was 1 at the time, maybe. And then 3, well, by the time they moved in, they were 2 and 4. And so we submitted our packet.
Were they sisters?
Yep, they're sisters. And we submitted the packet. So 75 people applied.
Holy moly.
75 families.
For these 2 girls?
Yes. Wow. So they narrowed it down.
2 people. It's hard enough to take 1. 2. This is for 2.
2. Because they're little. And people like to adopt
little kids
when you're young. Yeah. And so they're like 75 people. They narrow it down to 5 couples. We're one of the 5. We get this interview and everything. They call us the next day and they're like, hey, we picked another family. You were our second choice. Dude, tell me that I was last.
Yeah.
Don't tell me that I'm like almost there.
Yeah.
So I'm just shell shocked. And a friend of mine, he was shocked too, because he felt like the Lord specifically told him, dude, this is it. A week later, they call us back and they're like, hey, that family didn't work out. I always knew it should have been you.
Quit it.
I told these people.
You devil.
Yeah. And so my wife's like, who is it? What is it? And I put my thing, that's like, it's Jaylee and Lydia. They want to know if we want the girls to move into our house. I said, what should I tell them? She said, tell them yes. So I'm like, yeah. And now Jaylee's 12, Lydia's 10, and beautiful girls, growing up, serving Jesus.
So good.
Yeah, and we're just happy as clams with them.
Yeah, the idea of adoption. So for you, you sort of breeze by it. So like you went from like, how can I love a child who's not mine, to being like, these are mine, don't you tell me otherwise,
Yes.
And then navigating, I'm sure the process to adopt wasn't like overnight.
It was not overnight. So you do the foster care classes and you do the adoption classes, and then you start having kiddos in your home, just to foster.
So did you foster children?
Yeah, so we did a few foster scenarios, short-term foster scenarios. And like I remember the first we got this little girl in our house, and she had to leave after a week.
Oh.
Well, because she was going back home or going somewhere. It was good. It's a good thing, because they tell you reunification is the number one goal, right? They want to get these kids with their bio parents, and that's right. That's what it should be. And so she left, dude. After a week, I mean, I just remember crying and being like, I told Laura, I'm like, I can't do this if they're going to take these kids every time. You know what I mean?
I believe it.
Yeah. And then we fostered a little boy named Jake for like 6 months.
6 months?
Yeah. And he went back home. It tears your heart apart.
That has to.
Dude, I'm telling you. Because, I'm just telling you. You love these kids, and you're just like, these are my kids.
Yeah.
These are my kids.
When the kid shows up, when Jake shows up.
Yeah.
Because he's not a kid, he's Jake.
Yep.
When Jake shows up, and you don't know if it's going to last for 5 minutes or 5 years.
I have no idea.
How do you manage, like, what do you talk to God about in that moment? Like, how do you manage this?
It's too much on your soul for me. Like, that's why, like, it's just a heartbreaking thing. So you have to have this idea of, these kids are on loan to us. You know what I mean? And you can't think of it like forever. Now with Jaylee and Lydia, they were cleared for adoption. So termination of parental rights had happened. They call it TPR, which means that their biological parents had lost the parental rights. Mm-hmm. So in that situation, they move into your house, you foster for 6 months, and then you adopt. They do the 6-month foster period just to make sure that everything's going to gel okay, and then you go to the official adoption. So with Jaylee and Lydia, it wasn't a worry as much because we knew that this was going to be it, But when you're fostering with the hopes that it could turn into that.
To clarify some confusion I might have about this. So
sure.
Before you get the girls for the foster period.
Yep.
The 75 people trying to get them is before that?
That's correct. They're trying to get them to, because this is an adoption.
Right.
And so that's
why so many people were signed up for it.
That's why so many people.
Gotcha.
Because it's the adoption piece.
As opposed to just another foster child they might.
That's right. And the sad thing is, like, you hear about kids that don't get adopted. When kids get to be older, there's a lot of 13, 14, 15-year-old kids, and they're there and nobody's taking them. Nobody's adopted them.
Yeah, I believe it.
And it's tough,
I hear stories like that. So what so I'll tell you. So my wife and I have considered adoption.
Yeah.
And are still considering it, and we feel like the Lord's put it on our heart. We don't know when or how or what or who.
Yep.
And so I just look at the spectrum, like who needs help. Obviously, a baby who is going to be aborted and isn't aborted. Obviously, that's a need. But what I hear so many times are these kids who are just like they're in this system, like
that's right.
a literal system that they can't get out of, and the love is not always surrounding them. And what's going on with these? I mean, being close to it, I don't know if you've met some of them or seen them or heard stories that can sort of shed some light. As a Christian, like how do we love on these kind of kids, or without being like, well, we've got to take them all out, and
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can always partner with foster organizations and help with real life needs and items, clothing, things of that nature. But like if your heart is for adoption or for foster care, and you have kids that are already older, I would encourage people who have kids that are already older to consider maybe fostering or adopting older kids. You don't want to, at least in my opinion, unless the Lord really leads you, when you have little bitties, you don't want to bring kids who've been in the foster system, that maybe are 13, 14 years old, it's just too hard of an environment shift, you know. But when the kids are similar in age, that's really when I think is the good time to do it.
That's a good idea. That's a good word.
And so, especially for people, dude, I'm telling you, there's some people who are single, 50 years old, and they're like, well, I could never. You might be the perfect person for a 14-year-old kid who has nobody. That could be the perfect setup for you. You know what I'm saying? When you have younger families, everybody wants littles and babies, which is understandable. You know, it's your first kids and you want to raise babies.
Or you can't have your own like in your situation.
Yeah, you can't have your own, you know, and you want to start off like that. And so, but it's the older kiddos who really struggle.
Yeah.
You know.
And so what's it been like for them? They know they're adopted and
absolutely. So from the jump, you know, so when they're 2 and 4, you know, if we didn't talk about it, they would have forgotten, particularly 2 years old, you know. So we decided, hey, instead of, you know, when they're 18 being like, hey, bombshell, you're adopted, you know what I mean? Like, we decided to celebrate it from the beginning. Like, hey, you are so special. You are adopted, and this is how God chose to do this. And this is a beautiful thing. It's a good thing. And so we would tell them how special they were. So we have never hidden it. We've always just been open about it. And you could ask our kids today, and they know. It was funny. Yeah. I was at the doctor with my oldest the other day, and they were asking something about history of mom's, you know, illness or whatever. And I was just telling them, you know, what Laura's history was, you know. And Jaylee looks at me and she goes, yeah, but does that even matter?
Yeah.
And I was like, nope. And we just laughed, you know, and we told the doctor, we were like, she's adopted, you know, like, because it's not a shame thing. Like, I think back in the day, people wanted to hide it or whatever. No. And plus, dude, it's the perfect picture of you and me, right? Like, we're adopted into God's family. Like, we were not his chosen people, but then he grafted us in and he was like, I'm going to adopt you and make you an heir. You know what I'm saying? So it's perfect.
To me, man, that word redeemed that you said about the house, dude. Like, this speaks to every place you go, the church, your children. Like, you redeemed 2 beautiful girls from a place that didn't want them.
Horrible.
You redeemed a church in an area where no one even wanted a church. You know, you got redeemed from a place in Kentucky. You got redeemed. It was just like
because I know what it's like to be redeemed, bro. Right?
It's like the theme of your life.
Yeah, and like I'm telling you, bro. I think it was Biggie Smalls that said, "I grew up a screw up." You know what I mean? Like, and I know what it's like to be plucked from a dark place, and for God to just be like, "I have something for you." You know what I'm saying? Regardless of what everybody else says. So redemption is like huge.
So good. Tell everybody how to get to Reach Church, man.
Yeah, Reach Church, 9845 St. Charles Rock Road, man. Right next door to Donaldson Cycle. Across the street from Prince Market in Commerce Bay.
That's right, baby.
On the corner of the Rock Road in Wismer, man.
Stores you never heard of, because we're in the hood a little bit.
We always tell people, hey, we're hood adjacent. You know what I'm saying? Like,
that's all right.
We're hood-ish.
Yeah.
And you can go to reachstl.church. Find out more about us. Sundays 10:30. Like, come hang out with us, man. We're a cool church.
Amen, man. Go watch some live streams. WrestleMania.
Yeah, WrestleMania.
All right, bro. All right, thanks for coming on the show today, man.
Had a blast. Thank you, man.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks for watching today's show. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And until next time, we pray you discover a future and a hope for your life today.